Nobody sets out to hurt their baby. Every parent watching this loves their child fiercely, probably more than they've loved anything else in their entire life. And yet, research on early attachment and infant stress keeps circling back to the same uncomfortable finding. Some of the things that quietly harm a baby's developing brain aren't cruelty, aren't neglect, aren't anything dramatic. Enough to notice in the moment they happen. They're small, completely ordinary habits, repeated often enough that they start to shape something deeper than any single instance ever could on its own. Today, I want to walk through 8 of these, each one backed by research on infant stress and attachment, not to make you feel guilty, because guilt rarely changes anything on its own, but because naming something clearly is usual. Lie the first real step toward changing it. None of these are about one bad afternoon. All 8 of them are about pattern, about what tends to happen most often, across hundreds of ordinary days that blur together and quietly add up to something real. Think about it this way for a second. A single meal doesn't make someone healthy or unhealthy. It's what a person eats most days, across months and years, that quietly shapes their body over time. The same logic applies here, almost exactly. A single dismissed feeling, a single missed moment, changes nothing on its own. It's the pattern across thousands of ordinary days that ends up mattering, which is exactly why these 8 things are so easy to miss, and exactly why they're worth naming clearly, just once, so you can actually notice them going forward. None of them will show up on a growth chart or a checkup form. They live in the small, cumulative texture of a household, the part that's hardest to measure and easiest to overlook, which is exactly why it deserves a closer look here. Number 1, dismissing their big feelings. You're fine, it's not a big deal. Stop crying, nothing happened. Said to a baby or toddler who is, in that exact moment, experiencing something that feels completely enormous to them, even if it looks small from the outside. This might be the single most common item on this entire list, because it usually comes from a genuinely kind place, trying to reassure, trying to keep things moving, trying to help a child feel better faster. But research on emotional validation suggests that when a child's internal experience is repeatedly contradicted by an adult's words, "That didn't hurt, you're not really scared," it doesn't actually teach them to feel less. It teaches them that their own internal signals can't fully be trusted, that what they feel and what's supposedly true according to a grown-up are 2 separate, disconnected things. Over time, that gap between felt experience and permitted experience is where a meaningful amount of later emotional disconnection quietly begins to take root. Picture a toddler who trips and starts crying, not because it hurt terribly, but because it startled them. You're fine, up you get," said quickly, without pause, teaches a very specific lesson well before language can even argue back. What I feel right now isn't the thing that matters here. What matters is getting back to normal as fast as possible. Number 2, comparing them to other babies, even in small, offhand ways that don't feel like a big deal in the moment. "Your cousin was walking by now. She's so much calmer than you were at this age," said casually, sometimes even affectionately, often not even directed at the baby, but to another adult standing right there in the room. Comparison, even gentle, well-meaning comparison, introduces something researchers describe as conditional evaluation. The sense that a child's worth is quietly being measured against an external yardstick, rather than simply Whitney as said for exactly who they already are. Babies obviously don't understand the actual content of comparative language. They're not tracking developmental milestones consciously. But they do pick up the emotional charge sitting underneath it, the subtle disappointment, the small dip in tone, when an unfavorable comparison is being made about them. Even in passing, even about something as trivial sounding as motor milestones or sleep habits. Said often enough, comparison starts to function less like an observation and more like a quiet, ongoing measurement a child eventually senses is always running in the background, whether or not they can name what it is. Number 3, being warm one moment and cold the next, unpredictably, based more on your own mood than anything the baby actually did. This is different from simply having a bad day Every caregiver has bad days. That's not what this is about. This is about the pattern of unpredictability itself. Warmth that shows up generously sometimes and disappears without explanation other times, with no clear, learnable connection to anything the baby did to cause the shift. Attachment researchers have found that unpredictable caregiving, more so than consistently strict caregiving or even consistently distant caregiving, tends to correlate with a specific kind of anxious attachment pattern, because a child simply can't build a reliable internal model of what to expect next. Consistency, even imperfect consistency, is something a baby's nervous system can genuinely work with and adapt to. Genuine unpredictability is far harder to build any stable expectation around at all, no matter how loving the underlying intention behind it truly is. A baby raised around a caregiver who's occasionally short-tempered, but reliably so under recognizable conditions, tends to adapt more easily than one raised around a caregiver whose warmth seems to arrive and vanish for no tracia. Blee reason at all. Number 4, cutting comfort short. A baby is crying, you pick them up, and the moment they quiet down even slightly, you set them back down or move straight on to the next task, before their body has actually finished the full stress response cycle underneath the S. Surface. This one is subtle and almost universal, because life genuinely doesn't pause for a baby's complete nervous system reset every single time, and no parent has the luxury of unlimited time for every soothing session. But research on stress physiology in infants suggests that cortisol and other stress hormones take meaningfully longer to fully clear than the outward signs of calm might suggest. A baby can look settled on the surface, quiet, stow, peephead crying, breathing evenly, while their body is still very much in an activated stress state underneath that surface calm. Repeatedly interrupting that full cycle, over and over across weeks and months, may teach a developing nervous system that comfort tends to be brief and conditional, rather than something that reliably gets to run its full natural course from start to finish. This isn't a call to hold every crying baby for as long as it takes every single time. It's simply useful to know that a baby who looks calm again, after only a few seconds, may still be carrying more activation underneath than the quiet suggests. Number 5, negative labels set around them. She's the difficult one, he's always been clingy. This one's a real handful, spoken to other adults, to relatives, sometimes even said with genuine affection or humor woven into the tea. 1. Even before a baby understands the specific words being used, research on early language processing suggests infants pick up repeated verbal patterns associated with themselves remarkably early, learning to associate certain sound S and tones directly with their own presence in a room. A label repeated often enough in a child's presence has a documented tendency to become something researchers describe as a self-fulfilling prophecy, not because the baby consciously understands the insult embedded in the words, but because the emotional charge attached to that label quietly gets absorbed into how a caregiver ends up treating them moving forward, which the child absolutely does notice and respond to, even without understanding a single word of it. Say, she's the dramatic one, often enough, and you may find yourself, without ever meaning to, responding to ordinary emotion from her with slightly less patience than you'd offer someone you hadn't already labeled that way. The label ends up shaping the label giver almost as much as the child it was supposedly just describing. Number 6, using fear or startling to get quick compliance or attention, a sudden loud hey to stop a behavior, a sharp clap, a scary face used to shock a baby out of whatever they're doing, even meant playfully, even meant as har. Less fun. It's often genuinely effective in the short term. Fear is a very fast, very reliable way to interrupt almost any behavior instantly. But research on the developing stress response system suggests that repeated exposure to fear-based interruptions, even mild ones, even well-intentioned ones, can gradually sensitize a baby's threat detection system over time, making it fire more readily and more intensely in response to ordinary, non-threatening surprises later on in life. What works quickly and reliably in any single moment may be quietly working against a calmer overall baseline nervous system over the long run, trading a fast, satisfying short-term win for a much slower, harder-to-notice longer T. Cost. There are usually calmer ways to interrupt the exact same behavior. A firm voice, a physical redirect, that accomplish the same immediate goal without leaning on a startle response to get there. Number 7, divided attention during care, specifically during feeding, holding, and soothing, the exact moments when a baby most expects and most needs your full presence directed at them. A phone in one hand during a bottle feeding. Half your attention on a show while you're holding them close. This isn't about eliminating multitasking from your entire day. That's simply not realistic for any real parent living a real life. It's specifically about the caregiving moments that are inherently relational, feeding, comforting, holding, moments where a baby's whole nervous system is oriented toward you specifically, expecting your face, your gaze, your raise. Ponsiveness in return. Research using still face experiments, where a caregiver's face suddenly goes flat and unresponsive mid-interaction, shows babies notice divided or absent attention within mere seconds and respond with visible, measurable disters. Reaching, vocalizing, actively trying to re-engage a face that isn't fully present with them anymore. That reaction isn't dramatic overreaction on the baby's part. It's a fairly accurate, fairly immediate read of exactly what just happened between the two of you, and it tends to settle just as quickly once your attention genuinely returns. And number 8, withholding physical affection as a consequence, however small it seems in the moment. Saying something like, "I'm not going to hug you right now because you were bad," or simply pulling away, going cold after a bite is something frustrating or difficult. This one often isn't even a conscious strategy at all. It's usually just an honest, deeply human reaction to frustration in the moment, nothing calculated about it. But research on attachment consistently finds that physical affection tied specifically to a child's behavior, rather than offered as an unconditional baseline, teaches something quite specific, that love and closeness have to be earned rather than guaranteed, that connection functions as a reward for good behavior rather than a stable, always available foundation a child can reliably count on. Over years, this particular pattern has been linked to children who become more anxious about maintaining approval and less able to openly seek comfort when they actually need it the most, which is often exactly the moment. Just done something that makes a parent least inclined to offer it. This doesn't mean affection has to be handed out regardless of behavior. Boundaries and consequences still matter and still belong in a healthy home. It simply means the physical connection itself, the hug, the closeness, tends to work best when it's kept a little separate from whatever consequence is actually being enforced. Here's what ties all 8 of these together, and it's genuinely important to sit with this part clearly. None of these are about being a bad parent, not even close. Every single one of these 8 things happens, at least occasionally, in completely loving, completely attentive households, because every real parent gets tired, distracted, frustrated, and simply human, exactly as they should be. Allowed to be. What the research keeps pointing to isn't any single instance of any of these 8 things happening once. It's the overall pattern, the general frequency, across the thousands of ordinary moments that quietly make up a baby's early life together with you. An occasional dismissed feeling, an occasional comparison, an occasional cut-short comfort session gets absorbed into a much larger average, one that hopefully includes far more warmth, far more repair, far more genuine presence than any of these 8 patterns on their own. The goal here was never to audit every single interaction you've ever had with your baby and start feeling afraid of all 8 of these at once. The goal is simply to notice which 1 or 2 of these show up most often in your own home, not out of guilt, but purely out of useful information you can actually act on starting today. Because unlike a single difficult moment, a pattern is something you can genuinely shift, gradually, on purpose, starting with nothing more dramatic than noticing it a little more than you have been up until now. It also helps to remember that a baby isn't keeping some precise internal scorecard of every single one of these moments, tallying wins and losses across the day. They're absorbing an overall climate, the general emotional weather of your home, not a strict accounting of every individual instance. A hard morning, a short temper, a missed moment of comfort here or there, all of it gets folded into a much bigger average. And averages, thankfully, are far more forgiving than any single moment ever feels like it is in the middle. E of living it. Pick one of these 8, whichever one felt most familiar as you were listening just now, and simply notice it a little more this coming week. Not to punish yourself over it, not to spiral into guilt about the past, and not to overhaul every single interaction starting tomorrow morning. Just to notice it. That kind of quiet, consistent noticing, repeated often enough, is usually exactly where the real, lasting shift actually begins, the same slow, ordinary way almost everything else on this list got built in the first place.